Well, let's take a look at Tim Walz, who he is and what he stands for. As governor, he signed laws that required tampons in boys' bathrooms in Minnesota schools. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he oversaw the most draconian lockdowns and vaccine mandates in the nation. And last year, he signed state legislation that permitted abortion up until the moment of birth. And of course, he's on the record supporting the defund the police movement, which emerged following George Floyd's death in May 2020 in Minnesota. Let's bring in Emily Jashinsky, UnHerd DC correspondent. Emily, great to speak with you. What do you make of Tim Walz?
It's a really interesting pick from Kamala Harris because Tim Walz is one of the few people in the country who tests the combination of populist economics with far left cultural policies, as you just listed off there. Everything from tampons in bathrooms for kids grades 4 until they're 12 years old. So middle school, elementary school, very young children. Those are going in the boys' bathrooms because of the bill Tim Walz signed, to being very pro-immigration. A lot of people would just flat out call it pro-open borders. He really has a full suite of cultural far left policies. And when you combine that with some sort of I don't even, so some people would say these are family leave policies. Other people would call them big government policies. But it's just a rare combination that you see somebody so far to the left on social policies, trans issues, immigration issues, abortion, as you mentioned, also kind of try to be the guy who hunts. He goes pheasant hunting. He tries to sound like I'm just a normal football coach. I'm from the Midwest. I think he's going to have a really hard time acting like he's just a normal Midwestern hunter when he comes with this full package of cultural leftist policies on social issues.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the American people respond to him. Let's look at the trans issue. Tim Walz signed a bill in April last year dubbed the Trans Refugee Bill by supporters, which grants legal protection to children who travel to Minnesota for so-called gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers, reconstructive genital surgery, and hormone therapy. It just concerns me that this is for children, Emily.
Absolutely. And it should concern everybody that many people in the American media are treating Tim Walz like some type of centrist, when this is the type of policy that just months ago he was championing. He did not sign this bill at midnight out of the media view. He did it proudly. He was happy, eager to sign this bill. It has been a big issue for him. He's gone out and talked about how we're making Minnesota more welcoming and more compassionate. And so it's not as though he was ashamed of this. He was openly passing far left policies like these. In fact, actually to pit himself against Republican governors like Kristi Noem in the neighboring state right next door to his. So it's a huge problem because now Kamala Harris, everywhere she goes, is going to be asked if she supports policies like this for minors, for children. And she's going to have to answer that question. There's no way to get around it. Even if she, doesn't talk to the press, at some point she's going to have to. And that creates a real problem for her.
And why isn't she talking to the press?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I would imagine. The answer.
I mean, wouldn't we all? I would imagine her strategists say right now, the media is giving us great coverage without us even talking to them, which is a huge statement on how pathetic American media is right now. But they're saying, why would we risk popping this bubble, this honeymoon bubble, by putting her in front of journalists?
Totally.
They're going to give us great coverage right now, no matter if we talk to them or not. So just from a purely cynical, strategic perspective, it doesn't surprise me at all that they're not putting her in front of reporters. It's a shame, though, because she has a whole lot of questions to answer for.
Absolutely. And how democratic is that? Let's just go with a campaign strategy where she can be hidden and front up to events where there are pop stars and fired up crowds. But no, she doesn't have to actually answer any questions. But let's go back to Tim Walz. Do Americans remember him for the Minneapolis riots in 2020, where he waited 3 days before calling in the National Guard to stop the riots that caused massive damage and disruption?
Well, Americans absolutely remember the riots themselves. I mean, those images are iconic. Nobody has forgotten them. There are a lot of pockets in the country where people feel like they're still in, Minneapolis in 2020 because crime, violent crime in particular, has not come down. It has in certain parts of the country, but in other parts it absolutely has not. And so that feels very real to people. So when those familiar images pop up on people's screens, And people then learn Tim Walz was in charge of Minneapolis. I think whether or not they specifically remember how he handled that as governor, now they are going to say, I remember exactly how bad that was. I know we all needed the National Guard there. And I know the left was basically out to lunch and was complicit in allowing a lot of this to sweep through cities in the Midwest and basically everywhere around the country. And I will judge you accordingly. It'll be pretty easy to tie him to the tragedy and the chaos that swept Minnesota in the days after George Floyd's death.